A single hemp rope hangs motionless in the bell tower of St. Paul's, swaying slightly in a wind that carries no voices. It is midsummer in 1348, and the heartbeat of the greatest cities in the Western world has not just slowed, it has vanished. In London, Paris, and Florence, vibrant centers of trade, art, and faith have turned into hollow stone shells in a matter of weeks. Why did the most advanced civilizations of the age evaporate from within, leaving behind a silence that still echoes through the corridors of history? This is not a chronicle of a distant battlefield or a sudden natural disaster, but a record of a quiet, relentless erasure. As the sun beats down on the cobblestones of Europe, a transformation is occurring that defies every law of nature and society. The air, once heavy with the scent of lilies and the noise of the great market, grows thick with an invisible weight that no one can name, but everyone can feel. The pulse of the continent was once driven by its trade routes, the proud arteries of commerce that connected the East to the West. Now these very pathways have become the veins for an unseen shadow. Ships drift into Mediterranean ports with their sails tattered and their decks eerily quiet. They carry no invading army, only a secret that is rewriting the destiny of the human race. When the hatches are finally opened, harbor masters find a stillness that defies explanation. The wealth of the East sits untouched in the holds, suddenly worthless in the face of a tragedy that has no face. The world is witnessing a siege where the enemy is already inside the gates, and it has already taken the keys to every home. In London, the very density of the population has become its greatest vulnerability. The narrow streets and tightly packed tenements designed for community are transformed into a sprawling trap. The social structure of the Middle Ages was built on proximity, the closeness of the guild, the shared pews of the church, the crowded stalls of the marketplace. This interconnectedness was once the pride of the city, yet it is now the very mechanism of its collapse. Those who possess the means to flee the city walls do so, riding desperately toward the countryside, only to find that the shadow follows them into the green fields. The boundary between the living and the departed has become a blurred line as the infrastructure of the world fails to keep pace with the sheer scale of the silence. The records from Florence speak of a time when the most sacred ties of humanity were severed by the cold instinct for survival. This is the great conflict of the era, the struggle between the innate human need for connection and the terrifying risk of proximity. When the most basic unit of society, the family, begins to fracture, the city itself ceases to function, becomes nothing more than a collection of isolated individuals, each waiting in the silence of their own home, listening to the wind howl through abandoned plazas. Mothers turn from children, and brothers look upon brothers with suspicion. The social contract has not just broken, it has dissolved, as if it never existed. The once grand squares are no longer places of gathering, but spaces of immense, heavy stillness. A low, rhythmic thud begins to echo through the valleys, not the sound of drums, but of heavy leather whips striking bare flesh. Long before they appear on the horizon, the villages hear them coming. Thousands of people, stripped to the waist, march in a long, snaking column. Their backs are already a map of raw wounds. With every step, they raise the whip high and bring it down again in a synchronized movement. Their voices rise in a haunting chant, begging for a mercy that does not arrive. They believe that by punishing their own bodies, they can appease the unseen force that is dismantling their world. They form a great circle in the village square, lying down in positions that signal their perceived sins. Then the whips begin to fly. The sound is wet, sharp, and relentless. There is a profound irony in their search for salvation. As these processions move from one infected city to an untouched village, they carry the very shadow they are trying to outrun. The parasites of the era, hidden in their tattered clothes and open wounds, move with them. The very people who come to save humanity are the ones carrying the invisible killer deeper into the heart of the continent. They are a mobile theater of despair, drawing crowds of the desperate and the curious, only to leave behind a legacy of further erasure. The village that welcomed them as holy men often finds itself silent within weeks of their departure. The rhythm of the whip becomes a countdown for the end of a way of life. Paris, the intellectual heart of the age, finds its logic and its learning useless against the unfolding mystery. The great university halls where scholars once debated the laws of the universe have fallen into a profound silence. The ancient texts offer no answers to why the world is being erased. There is a haunting hypothesis among modern observers that the psychological impact of this era was even more profound than the physical toll. The collective trauma of seeing an entire civilization dismantled in real time left a scar on the psyche that would remain for centuries. The scholars who remain can only watch from their high windows as the world they understood is replaced by a fever dream of isolation. The usual sounds of the city, the clatter of wooden carts, and the laughter of children are replaced by a low, constant hum of the natural world, reclaiming the urban landscape. The wild begins to encroach upon the city gates, as if the boundary between the civilized world and the wilderness has finally collapsed. Weeds push through the cracks in the plazas, and the animals of the forest walk the streets where kings once paraded. There are no more processions, no more festivals, and no more communal rituals. The bells remain motionless in their towers because there is no one left who possesses the spirit or the strength to ring them. In many accounts, it was the silence that was the most terrifying part of the experience. A city is defined by its noise, its vibration, its shared life. When that vibration stops, the resulting vacuum is filled with a dread that permeates the very stones of the buildings. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for a morning that many believed would never come. The conflict of the era is internal as much as it is external. Imagine a world where every touch, every breath, and every shared meal is a gamble. The risk is ever present, hidden in the very air people breathe and the water they drink. This is a war with no visible enemy, a siege with no army at the gates. The enemy is a ghost that moves through walls, indifferent to wealth, status, or piety. It is a time of total vulnerability, where the structures of power and the walls of stone offer no protection whatsoever. Even the most sacred spaces, the cathedrals with their spires reaching toward the heavens, offer no sanctuary. They have become waiting rooms for the inevitable, places where the air is heavy with the scent of unlit candles and the weight of unanswered prayers. Historians often debate the exact causes, but the true mystery lies in the shift of human consciousness. How did the survivors view the world after witnessing the near-total erasure of their social order? The cities were not just physical locations. They were the manifestation of human ambition and divine order. To see them turned into silent graveyards was to see the end of a particular version of reality. It was a moment where the future seemed not just uncertain, but impossible. The architecture of the great cathedrals, once symbols of hope, now look like skeletal remains of a forgotten giant. The bells of Florence, which had once signaled the hours of prayer and the start of the workday, hang like heavy iron weights, useless and still. As the months drag on, the sheer scale of the loss becomes a logistical nightmare that surpasses any previous human experience. The traditional ways of honoring those who have passed are no longer viable. The earth itself seems to groan under the weight of what it is asked to hold. In every city, the story is the same. The space for the departed eventually outweighs the space for the living. This inversion of the natural order creates a landscape that looks like a nightmare. where the architecture of the city serves only to frame the enormity of the tragedy. The very soil is being reshaped by a burden it was never meant to carry. The social contract didn't just break, it dissolved as if it had never existed. The psychological tension of this period cannot be overstated. Every interaction became a test of faith and fear. When the great processions of the flagellants finally faded, the silence they left behind was deeper than before. They had not saved the world, they had only accelerated its fall. The rhythmic thud of the whips still echoes in the historical record, a chilling reminder that sometimes the loudest cries for salvation are the very things that invite destruction. The masters of art and architecture were gone, and their unfinished works stood as silent witnesses to a disrupted timeline. The Renaissance, the great flowering of human potential, was effectively postponed, leaving a generation to live in the ruins of a golden age. In the aftermath, the cities that remained were transformed. The London that emerged from the shadow was not the same city that had entered it. The very air felt different, and the streets held a different resonance. The loss of so much of the population led to a strange and unexpected shift in the power dynamics of the world. With fewer hands to work the land and fewer voices to command, the value of the individual began to change in subtle, complex ways. This is the multifaceted mystery of the era, that out of such profound darkness, the first flickers of a new world began to emerge. The collapse of the old order cleared the way for a future no one could have predicted. Yet the memory of the cities of the dead remained. It lived on in the folklore, in the darkened corners of the cathedrals, and in the hesitant way people walked the streets at night. The fear that the shadow could return was a constant companion for generations. It served as a reminder of the fragility of the structures we build and the thinness of the veil between civilization and chaos. The cities had been humbled, their grandeur replaced by a quiet, enduring grief. The scars were not just on the land, but in the very stories mothers told their children to keep them away from the docks and the crowded markets. The silence of the 14th century was a mirror held up to the future, asking what truly remains when the heartbeat of a city stops. When we look back at the records of Paris or London from this time, we see more than just a historical event. We see a profound human struggle. We see the limits of our systems and the resilience of our spirit. The cities were cemeteries, yes, but they were also the crucibles in which the modern world was forged. The questions raised by the silence of the bells are still with us today. They ask us what we value, how we care for one another, and what remains when everything we have built is stripped away. They remind us that civilization is a fragile flame, kept alive only by the presence and the cooperation of the people within it. The summer of the Great Shadow eventually passed, and the bells did eventually ring again, but the sound was different. It carried a weight it hadn't possessed before. It was a sound that acknowledged the depth of the loss and the uncertainty of the future. The cities of the dead were slowly reclaimed by the living, but they would forever be haunted by the memory of the time when the streets were silent and the only residents were the ghosts of a vanished era. The new inhabitants walked over the same stones, but they looked at the sky with a different kind of gaze, one that knew how quickly the sun could be obscured. Even now, as we walk through the modern streets of these great metropolises, we are walking over layers of history that we can barely imagine. Beneath the pavement of London and the plazas of Florence lies the memory of a time when the world stood still. The mystery of why it happened in such a specific, devastating form remains one of the great enigmas of our past. It is a story with no easy answers, only a series of haunting images and the lingering echo of a silence that once covered the world. Every old wall and every ancient spire is a witness to the time the heartbeat of the West almost stopped. We are left to wonder about the people who stayed behind, the ones who watched their world dissolve and had to find a way to breathe in the aftermath. Their stories are largely lost to time, buried in the same earth as the cities they inhabited. But their legacy is the world we live in today, a world built on the ruins of a catastrophe that redefined what it means to be human. The shadow may have retreated, but the lessons of the silent cities remain, etched into the very fabric of our history. They teach us that our greatest strength is not in our stone walls, but in the invisible bonds that hold us together. In the end, the story of the cities of the dead is not just about the end of a world, but about the transition into something new. It is a dark thriller of historical proportions, a narrative of risk, conflict, and the ultimate mystery of survival. It reminds us that our cities are more than just stone and mortar. They are the living breath of our collective existence. And when that breath is threatened, we see the true face of our humanity, reflected in the stillness of a world that has lost its way. The silence of the 14th century is a mirror held up to our own age, asking us if we are truly listening to the lessons of the past. As the sun sets over the modern skyline, the shadows lengthen, and for a moment one can almost hear the faint, ghostly vibration of the bells that didn't ring. It is a reminder that history is never truly behind us. It is beneath our feet, in the air we breathe, and in the silent stories of the cities that once became the largest graveyards the world had ever seen. The mystery remains, a dark thread woven into the tapestry of time, waiting for us to look closer and remember that the silence is never truly empty. It is filled with the voices of those who were lost and the resilience of those who remained to ring the bells once more.